Establishing central control and opening a diagonal for the queen and bishop is a classic beginning, setting the stage for positional skirmishes. Developing the knight to f6 immediately contests the center and prepares for potential pawn advances or other pieces to join the fray. Developing a knight to a central square enhances piece activity and prepares for pawn advances. Opening the path for the king's bishop and queen, this solidifies the center while preparing for a queenside pawn push later. Pinning the knight immediately questions black's central control and can lead to early structural imbalances. Challenging white's center pawn immediately disrupts their early development and opens lines for aggressive counterplay. Solidifying the center, white prepares to support the d4 pawn and potentially expand on the queenside, aiming for a robust pawn structure. Unleashing the queen immediately pressures the b2 pawn, forcing a white response and preparing to contest central influence. Bolstering the center's influence, the queen now eyes the queenside, preparing for potential queenside expansion or defensive maneuvers against black's ambitious central thrust. Exchanging pawns here relinquishes central space, potentially simplifying the position prematurely for black. White recaptures the pawn, immediately challenging black's queenside pressure and aiming to centralize the knight for a more active role. This action reclaims a central outpost and sets the stage for a potential kingside initiative, while simultaneously simplifying the position slightly. Black solidifies central presence and prepares for a potential knight exchange, aiming to alleviate pressure on their queenside structure while initiating subtle piece maneuvering. Reinforcing the knight's central presence, this pawn advance prepares for potential kingside castling and subtly claims more territory, aiming to restrict black's queen and bishop activity while maintaining flexibility. Opening the center with this pawn push now is a bold statement, aiming to disrupt white's setup and free black's pieces. It creates immediate diagonal pressure towards the king and forces white to react decisively to maintain their central control. Consolidating the knight's presence on d2 shores up the central pawn chain and prepares for a potential kingside expansion, while also safeguarding against any immediate threats on the queen's diagonal. Developing the bishop to d7 solidifies the pawn chain on the queenside and prepares to challenge white's central control by potentially activating the c8 bishop. Re-establishing piece coordination becomes paramount as white repositions their knight, creating a flexible outpost on f3 that supports both central expansion and potential kingside activity, while also keeping an eye on the ever-important e5 square and ready to contest the d-file should black allow it. Injecting dynamism into the queenside, black seeks to disrupt white's central grip by initiating a knight maneuver that eyes key squares and offers potential tactical skirmishes. Instantly challenging the central pawn structure, this maneuver ignites a dynamic struggle for initiative, forcing black to confront the encroaching white knight and the potential for early tactical fireworks. Reinforcing the knight's occupation of e4, black bravely confronts the bishop's outpost, aiming to disrupt white's central influence and create a more solid pawn structure, even if it subtly weakens the kingside light squares for the moment. Developing the bishop to its most active diagonal, this move aims to exert pressure on black's queenside structure while simultaneously preparing for castling, a crucial step in securing white's king and launching an offensive. The bishop now eyes the important d5 pawn and discourages any immediate pawn breaks by black that might destabilize white's center. Furthermore, by bringing another piece into play, white enhances its coordination, anticipating future tactical skirmishes and seeking to gain a lasting positional advantage. Challenging the central grip immediately, black injects dynamic play by confronting the bishop, aiming to disrupt white's comfortable development and open lines for counterplay. Conceding the bishop pair opens up the center for black, potentially unburdening their queenside and offering more dynamic play as the game progresses. Embracing the open diagonal created by the bishop's departure, black seizes the opportunity to reposition their knight, aiming for a more active role and potentially disrupting white's pawn structure. This exchange, while momentarily opening lines, forces a reevaluation of piece placement and central control for both sides. The subsequent pawn push creates new tactical possibilities and alters the pawn chain's dynamics. The queen's capture on e4 immediately reclaims the pawn and aims to control the center, but it simultaneously exposes the queen to potential attacks and opens lines for black's pieces. White's decision to capture creates an immediate tactical tension. The queen is now positioned centrally, offering aggressive possibilities but also becoming a potential target. Observe how this queen placement disrupts black's previously solid pawn structure, creating diagonal vulnerabilities. Consider the implications for king's safety as white's queen becomes a more active, albeit exposed, piece. This exchange fundamentally alters the board's dynamic, shifting the game towards a more open and potentially sharp middle game where precise piece coordination will be paramount. Unleashing the queen's flank assault on the king's side is a daring gambit, embracing the inherent instability of a castled monarch exposed on the queen's side while simultaneously opening crucial attacking avenues for your rooks. Unleashing the dark-squared bishop onto the open diagonal, white signals an intent to exploit the potentially exposed black king, while simultaneously activating a piece that was somewhat cramped behind its own pawns, hinting at a dynamic struggle unfolding on the queen's side. Suddenly, the pawn on d4 evaporates, transforming the central battlefield into a dynamic, open landscape where aggressive knight maneuvers will now dictate the tempo. Solidifying the pawn structure with the king now takes precedence, aiming to connect the rooks and prepare for central maneuvering, while simultaneously acknowledging black's recent capture and its implications for piece activity. Sacrificing the pawn, you're opening up the g-file with immediate consequences for white's castled king, creating a fascinating tactical scenario where black's pieces, particularly the queen and dark-squared bishop, are poised to exploit the now exposed monarch. This aggressive choice dramatically alters the board's character, shifting focus to the kingside pressure, and potentially leading to swift, sharp exchanges or a dramatic mating attack. Asserting queenside presence, white aims to capitalize on the open, a file potentially disrupting black's kingside castling and initiating queenside pressure. Repositioning the rook to the open file immediately challenges white's queen and aims to exploit the newly created diagonal for the dark-squared bishop. The queen retreats, re-establishing a central presence and preparing to contest the vital d-file, a welcome regrouping after the earlier exchanges. A bold sacrifice, aiming to disrupt white's king safety and seize the initiative. This pawn thrust plunges into enemy territory, offering a piece for a potential attack on white's castled monarch. Black clearly believes the compensation lies in opening lines and activating their pieces against white's somewhat exposed king. The exchange on f2 immediately creates tactical possibilities, forcing white to react and potentially deviate from their planned development. It's a gamble, trading material for dynamic play, and the success will hinge on black's ability to coordinate their remaining forces for a swift and decisive assault before white can consolidate their advantage. The pawn structure is now quite fractured, opening crucial diagonals that black hopes to exploit. This could lead to a sharp, unbalanced game where precise calculation will be paramount. Seeking safety, the white monarch retreats to the relative security of the kingside corner, anticipating potential threats that the recently opened diagonal from black's advanced f-pawn might create. The queen repositions with purpose, eyeing the weakened d4 square and simultaneously creating a potential battery along the e-file, a subtle nod towards future tactical opportunities should white's king remain exposed. A surprising retreat, the queen abandons the tantalizing e4 square and the pressure it exerted, opting instead for a more passive repositioning that allows black's pieces to breathe and consolidate their nascent advantage on the kingside. This feels less like a strategic reallocation and more like a concession of initiative, potentially opening lines for black's rooks and bishops to coordinate their attack on white's slightly exposed monarch, which is now less defended by queenly oversight. Black intensifies pressure along the c2-g6 diagonal, directly challenging the white queen's position and setting the stage for a potential queenside pawn storm or further piece development towards the kingside. Unleashing the rook from its gilded cage, white initiates a daring gambit, sacrificing material to pry open the kingside and disrupt black's promising attack. The immediate goal is to exploit the exposed black king and create mating threats, forcing black to abandon their offensive endeavors. Observe how this rook's aggressive thrust transforms a seemingly passive position into a sharp, dynamic struggle where precise calculation is paramount. Unleashing a pawn storm on the kingside now, h5 aims to create shelter for the black monarch while simultaneously questioning the king's safety for white. Consider how this pawn's advance might disrupt white's coordination or potentially open lines for future attacking pieces. Refocusing the queen's gaze allows for immediate pressure on the kingside's exposed pawn structure and prepares to contest the crucial central files that are beginning to open up. Initiating a decisive exchange, black removes the bothersome knight from f3, aiming to dismantle white's attacking potential and simplify the position. This action disrupts white's pawn structure on the kingside and potentially opens lines for black's rooks. The immediate consequence is a material imbalance where white is down a knight for a pawn, but the real focus shifts to how effectively black can exploit the exposed white king and the weakened central squares. The game now enters a phase where black must carefully coordinate their remaining pieces to press the advantage before white can organize a defense or counterattack. Reclaiming the rook on the f-file now solidifies white's central presence and prepares for a potential assault on black's somewhat exposed monarch, even as the material balance remains even. A daring thrust, this queen sortie injects immediate chaos, aiming to exploit the king's exposure and the fractured pawn structure, though it ventures deep into enemy territory, potentially inviting a swift counterattack on its exposed position. Stepping back with the queen to g1 strategically secures the king's immediate safety from the encroaching black bishop and knight, while also preparing for potential kingside action or a repositioning of the queen to a more active square, perhaps to h2 or even f2. This defensive maneuver is crucial given black's highly aggressive development and the exposed nature of white's monarch. It prioritizes fortress building over immediate pawn advancement, a sensible decision when under pressure. Pushing the pawn to h4 aims to disrupt white's queenside development and potentially open lines for your pieces, forcing a reaction that might reveal defensive weaknesses or create space for your rook on the e-file. The rook now anchors the queenside, preventing black's pawn push while simultaneously preparing a potential advance on the f-file, seeking to pry open lines and exploit the exposed enemy king. Opening up the king's defenses with that pawn thrust invites unforeseen complications, transforming the center into a volatile battlefield as the g-file becomes a perilous conduit for white's pieces. The rook now ventures onto the e-file, seizing control of an open path and preparing to exert pressure on black's doubled pawns. The rook's journey to the queenside opens up avenues for the remaining pieces, aiming to consolidate black's material advantage and exert pressure along the second rank. Unleashing the rook creates a formidable battery on the g-file, directly confronting black's vulnerable king and demanding immediate attention. Positioning the bishop here creates a powerful diagonal, now aimed squarely at white's weakened kingside, potentially setting up future pressure or even a tactical shot if white's coordination falters. The queen's retreat to f1, seemingly passive, aims to untangle the kingside from black's aggressive pawn storm and prepare for a potential rook lift to the fourth rank, seeking to exploit the exposed black king and the lingering tension around the e-file. Initiating a bold pawn advance down the kingside, re8 aims to dislodge the lurking white queen and potentially open new avenues for attack, transforming this position from a tense balancing act into a more dynamic struggle. A desperate attempt to disrupt black's comfortable development by forcing a queen exchange, which appears to be a strategic miscalculation given the exposed state of white's king and the advanced position of black's pieces, particularly the rook poised to join the attack. The monarch seeks refuge, shifting its vulnerable position from the open files, a wise evasion as the opponent's queen and rooks eye the central territory with aggressive intent, subtly preparing for potential piece exchanges that could unravel the pawn structure. Reclaiming the open file with the rook is paramount, aiming to disrupt black's active piece placement and potentially force concessions on the h-file. Unleashing the rook along the open 8th rank creates immediate pressure, aiming to exploit the centralized white king and potentially disrupt white's coordination. Exploring avenues to consolidate the position after that tactical skirmish, pushing the queen to d3 aims to regroup and potentially prepare for a queenside pawn advance, or simply improve the queen's safety. Unleashing a desperate check, black aims to disrupt white's carefully constructed defensive setup around the king, hoping to force concessions or create a tactical escape route for the rook. The rook retreats to its starting square, a defensive posture that acknowledges the immediate danger to the king, but also sacrifices the initiative gained by clearing the f-file. The prior pawn sacrifice on e3, while creating a momentary distraction, has left white's king exposed and black's forces beautifully coordinated, poised to exploit the open central files and the compromised kingside structure. This repositioning, while seemingly prudent, feels like a concession, allowing black to consolidate and potentially launch a decisive attack. Sacrificing the rook on d5 unravels white's kingside defense. By eliminating a key defender, black aims to expose the monarch to a direct assault with the bishop and queen, creating potent mating threats that transcend simple material calculations. Liberating the rook from its defensive duties, white now aims to disrupt black's beleaguered king, creating new avenues of attack along the open files, even as material parity hangs precariously in the balance. Suddenly, a surge of knight activity threatens to unravel white's position, introducing a delightful spatial complication as the black steed eyes promising squares and potentially forces concessions. The queen's redeployment aims to exert pressure along the open d-file, but its current placement invites further complications given the entrenched knight on e5 and black's coordinated pieces. A decisive exchange clears the decks, forcing a transition to a simplified, yet still complex, scenario where the newly positioned rook on the first rank immediately exerts pressure, hinting at potential harassment down the open file, and the king, though no longer directly in the line of fire, remains a focal point as the reduced material might embolden aggressive pawn advances. The queen's redeployment now aims to wrest control of the central files, which have been unusually quiet given the material on the board. Watch how white seeks to exploit black's awkwardly placed knight. The knight's sudden leap to g4 introduces a curious tactical wrinkle, hinting at potential skewers or forks aimed at the white king's immediate vicinity, even though a direct attack seems improbable given the surrounding pawns.